Hi folks, we're looking at this book, The Life, Portrait of Jesus, and we're looking at Can We Trust the Gospels? Are the Gospels history? The best indication of document purpose is that what the author says about it. So if an author prefaces a book with the words, "This is a fairy tale, I told my children," we know that we are dealing with fiction. Fortunately, Luke tells us what we're dealing with. Most honourable Theophilus, many people have written accounts about the events that took place among us. They used as their source material the reports circulating among us from the early days, from the early disciples and other eyewitnesses of what God had done in fulfillment of His promise. Having carefully investigated all these accounts from the beginning, I have decided to write a careful summary for you, to reassure you of the truth of all you were taught. Luke makes two claims. First is that his document is truthful historical account. Second is that he has carefully considered eyewitnesses. But are the Gospels just histories? Are they neutral, purely factual accounts written by people who have no interest other than retelling what happened? The answer is that they are not. Towards the end of his Gospel, John writes, Jesus' disciple saw him do many other miraculous signs because the ones recorded in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that believing in him you will have life. The purpose of the Gospel writers in writing what they did was not just to inform, it was to convince. Just to note that all history is biased. Every historian writes from a biased perspective. That doesn't mean to say we can't get objective history. It means that everybody's got an agenda, and to say that the Gospels have an agenda and it's not real history, that's just crass intellectualism without any depth at all. Techniques. Modern authors used a vast range of tools and techniques in writing. So for instance, we can use quotation marks to show we are reporting speech. We have punctuation marks such as brackets, etc. Ancient writers had none of these tools, so we sometimes have to guess exactly how to translate the original text into modern English. Translation. Although Jesus may have known Greek, the language he taught was Aramaic, a linguistic cousin of Hebrew. As the Gospels were written in Greek, what he said has therefore been translated. Now, as anyone who has ever tried to translate anything, transferring ideas from one language to another is difficult. To take the most basic of example, how do you translate the French bonjour into English good day? No, that's far too formal. Good morning or good afternoon, perhaps, but not always. Hi, maybe. It's not easy, is it? In fact, a perfect translation is difficult. The reality is that in any translation you inevitably end up doing some rephrasing. Because most of us do not read the Gospels in the original Greek, a further translation in English has occurred. Yet although these issues of translation may seem major, the significance should not be overstated. For one thing, the message of Jesus occurs in 4 Gospels, and comparing them can often clear up many questions over what the passage means. For another, Christianity is not about understanding complex philosophical issues that require that we understand precise shades of meaning. Christianity is the presentation of a person, Jesus Christ, and that is something that can easily survive translation. And transmission. Anyone thinking about the accuracy of the Gospels must recognize the fact there is a time gap between the events they describe taking place and accounts being written down. The case of the Synoptic Gospels, the time gap is around 30 years, with John perhaps 50 years. That may seem a long time, but several things need to be said. What needs to be said there is oral tradition in that time and in that period was very good, that people were trained to memorize and pass things on for the future. Question: how are we to approach the Gospels? There are 2 opposing ways of looking at the Gospels. The first is to adopt an attitude of disbelief. Here the New Testament documents are viewed as fictional and mythical to such an extent they can be ignored. Those who hold to this sort of disbelief often portray the situation as being one where the Christian has blind faith and the skeptic doesn't. It's always worthwhile gently probing the origins of such skepticism. While such views of the reliability of the Gospels can be held because of intense learned studies of the New Testament documents, they generally aren't. Often this sort of disbelief turns out to be based on something I saw on the television or I read the paper. Such views need to be challenged, and it also has to be said that sometimes such a disbelief may be held for other motives. Second attitude to the Gospels is that of trust. In this view, these documents are not just a book, they are God's book. They are trustworthy because they are what He has spoken. Most Christians would hold such an attitude for three reasons. And they go on. Basically, the last 150 years, there's been a general move towards skepticism towards the Gospels. It's called a minimal understanding of the Gospels. Basically, you view the Gospels as unreliable until proven guilty. But things are moving rapidly and have moved rapidly the last 10-15 years, where scholars are beginning to see there's actually more reliable material in the Gospels, and so where it was a minimalist view, it's gone in the middle, where scholars are a little bit skeptical, but they recognise they're dealing with documents in the Gospels that do give us a good deal of good historical material. So the pendulum is swinging more and more to a more of a conservative view on the historical reliability of the Gospels. Okay, I'll come back to more in a minute.